Hi everybody, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and today we're going to take a look at part 5 of our series on the super fast Najdorf, which I think is part 6 in our greater series on the super fast Sicilian. So, in the first edition of the Sicilian videos, we looked at everything, I think, except for the Najdorf, and we went through various sub-variations of the Najdorf, and lately we've been looking at bishop to g5 variations. So this, I guess we'll go all the way back. So this is the Sicilian. That's the Najdorf. And then bishop to g5 is classically the main line, though bishop to e3 has been exceptionally popular as well, certainly the last couple of decades, or more now. But bishop to g5 remains fairly popular and historically is the most significant move. Okay, so e6, f4, bishop e7, and that's where we're deviating today. So in past weeks we looked at b5, we looked at queen to b6, we looked at knight b to d7, we looked at h6, and we looked at queen c7. I think that's all of them. So now we're looking at bishop to e7, which is, again, classically the main line, although I would say that queen to b6, the poison pawn variation, was what put the biggest damper on this bishop to g5 line's popularity. Okay, well, white plays queen f3 here, and now most of the time the line or the game from here will continue queen c7, castles, knight b to d7, and then from here we have some more choices. So we'll look at 4 moves from this point: bishop to d3, queen g3, bishop e2, and the main move g4. But first, let's take a quick little trip into the past, into a very fascinating variation, and it begins with h6. Now, h6 is a move we've seen before, or this h6 g5 idea, I should say, is one we've seen before, and we're going to see it again. But here it's a little bit different, because after f takes g5, there's no knight ready to jump into e5 straight away, and that makes a difference, as we'll see. Now, let me tell you guys the story behind this move and this idea. So this was played in the same round of the Gothenburg interzonal, or Göteborg. I'm not sure exactly how the Swedes pronounce it, but it's sometimes transliterated into English as Gothenburg. In any case, there was an interzonal there in 1955, and 3 Argentine players, Miguel Najdorf, Oscar Pano, and I believe it's Karl Pilnik. It's Karl or Herman? I think Herman. Karl is the American master. So these 3 guys all came up with this, and they prepared it. And in the same round, they all got to play it against 3 Soviet players. So Keres, Geller, and Spassky were their opponents. So it was Keres against Najdorf, Geller against Pano, Spassky against Pilnik. And at the same time, on all 3 boards, this position occurred. And after f takes g5, knight f to d7, the Soviets all thought for a while. And here, Geller moving first figured out the best thing to do. So knight takes e6, fe. Notice, of course, that if there were a knight on e5 for black, none of this would even be possible. So knight e6, queen h5, king f8, and now this was the move that the Argentines failed to find in their preparation. But Geller found it, all 3 played it, and all 3 games ended as routs, really. Bishop to b5. So, brilliant move. And the point behind this is twofold. So first, of course, white's clearing the f-file so that the rook is going to come from h1 to f1. White will castle, and black's king is in terrible trouble. But the other point is that it prevents black's queen from coming to e8 in some variations, as we'll see. So in the Geller-Pano game, Pano chose knight to e5. Okay, now bishop to g3, and the point is to take on e5 and castle, and black can't protect the h7 square with his queen, thanks to the bishop on b5. So the game continued like this. Bishop takes g5, castles, king e7, bishop takes e5, and okay, the point of this, actually, let me delete all of the arrows. I can recreate them. So I tried recording this earlier, and something happened. So I had a little accident in that respect. Let me see, what's the right way to do that? Let's get rid of all the color commentary. Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Alright, so of this, and we'll get rid of all of it. Okay. So, yeah. After bishop to g3, so I'll reconstitute it. So again, the point is to prevent queen e8, and white wants to play bishop takes e5, castles, and then give mate on f7. Okay, so here, bishop takes e5, and now the point is that if takes, then queen f7, and rook a to d1, and goodbye black queen. So queen to b6 check first, king h1, de, queen f7, king d6, rook a to d1, and the queen is dropping anyway, because if king to c5, knight a4 with a fork. So Pano played queen to d4, Giller took, and now another nice move, e5 check. So it might seem at first glance as if black is okay because white has two pieces under attack. Right now white's up material, queen and pawn for rook and bishop, but if he's losing a piece, he won't be. However, e5 check. Now, if king takes, well, queen to g7 check just wins the rook. So king c5 is forced. Now queen c7 check. And after knight c6, simply bishop takes c6, and Pano resigned. So he's not winning the piece. In fact, he's going to lose more material. His king is in big trouble. And so that game was a rout. 23 moves, Giller won, game over. Okay, so back to bishop to b5. Pilnik and Najdorf chose something different. In fact, their games were almost identical to the finish. So they both played king to g7. Spassky and Keres both castled, and the game continued like this. Knight e5, stopping the mate. Bishop g3, threatening a take on e5 and still give mate. Knight to g6. So that was the idea behind this particular move order. So instead of bishop takes g5, the knight goes to g6 and covers f7. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite do the job. Maybe take a minute and see why not. Well, the answer is actually quite simple, and it's always nice when you can combine greed with other motives. So simply g takes h6. So if the king goes back to g8, queen takes g6 as mate. If the king goes to f7, h7, then rook f7 check followed by queen takes g6. So rook takes h6 is forced, but this means that the h file opens, and here black is in desperate trouble. So takes the bishop so his king can run off to e8. Here bishop to f6 is not really going to be any good. For one thing, white will have, well, just queen h7 check wins the knight and wins more. So that's simple. I was thinking for a second e5 and knight e4, but this is much, much better. Just queen h7 check, game over. So king e8, queen takes, king d7, rook f7. White only has two pawns for the piece, but look at black's king. Also, the b pawn could fall, and that's important. And more importantly, really, obviously, the most important thing is the king. Bishop h4 is possible, and also this h pawn might start to run as well. So knight to c6 happened, and now white played the tactically incisive move knight to d5. So the threat is to take on on e7, pardon me, and then play bishop to h4, which just wins. And if e takes d5, e takes d5, if the knight moves, bishop h4, all the same. And so white's at least going to regain the second piece with no problem, and the attack will rage on. And in particular, the bishop on e7 is going to be vulnerable no matter what. So the Argentine players played rook takes a2, and now here we have a minor deviation. All right, so the second game to finish was, well, okay, actually I'll give the slightly longer game. So Spassky-Pilnik. So Spassky played h3. Keres played h4 instead. But anyway, so back to h3. Both games continue the exact same way. So h3 just takes care of the back rank. Queen to h8. Oh, the difference though, okay, so h3, with the pawn on h4, of course, the pawn is slightly closer to the queening square, which could become a factor. On the other hand, it takes away h4 from the bishop. So Spassky felt that keeping h4 for the bishop was more important. Keres thought that the bishop would find other things to do, and the further up the pawn went, the more dangerous. Both were completely fine. So Spassky-Pilnik continued like this. Queen h8, knight e7, knight e7, queen g5, and here, except with the pawn on h4, Najdorf resigned against Keres. Okay, so continuing the Spassky-Pilnik game though, Pilnik played rook a1, queen d8, so he's covering the knight, but okay, queen takes b5, and now queen c5. It's a real kick in the teeth there. If the king goes to d7, queen takes d6 check, king to e8, and then rook f8 check separates black from the queen. So king to b8, bishop takes d6, king a8, bishop takes e7. So now white's up 3 pawns. The attack continues. We just have one more move. Rook a5, queen to b4, and finally Pilnik threw in the towel. So Pano lost in 23 moves, Najdorf lost in 25, Pilnik made it all the way to move 31 before giving up. So complete disaster. And in fact, this round and the story behind it is now known as the Argentinian tragedy. Well, was this the end of the variation? In fact, it was not. And the rehabilitation was actually pretty remarkable. Fischer played this in the last round of the interzonal, so again in an interzonal, this time in 1958 in Portoroz, and his opponent was the great Svetozar Gligoric, who was leading. Well, he was ahead of Fischer, I should say. He wasn't leading the tournament, but he was pretty much guaranteed to qualify, whereas Fischer needed at least a draw to qualify, possibly a win, depending on what the results were. So this is a really brave thing to play in a situation where a draw gives you good chances, and in fact, a draw was what Fischer needed to qualify. So Fischer actually had done a little bit of research. So he had talked to Gligoric very briefly some time before about this variation, and it seemed like Gligoric didn't really know it very well. So Fischer, kind of made a mental note of it, and had prepped something, and it worked out pretty well. So he played the move rook to h7, and in fact, this is still considered the best move today. So a very, very clever idea. This way, his king can go to g8, and the rook can go to g7 and handle any frontal checks that might arise. And of course, the rook is also covering the f7 square. So this was a huge improvement. Now, the Gligoric-Fischer game continued like this. Queen g6, so trying to cut off the king's retreat in advance, but okay, rook to f7, and this prevents castling, of course, so it just takes over the file right away. So queen h6, king g8, queen here, takes on e6, king h8. And now white's going to be out of checks. I mean, if he plays queen h6, check, rook h7, and the queen has to go to g6, which isn't especially great. Also, the bishop on b5 will be hanging. So here, white has 4 pawns for the piece. That seems really good, but his attack is over, and black's pieces are really going to start coordinating very, very well and very quickly. So here, Gligoric took, Fischer recaptured, very good move. So it's much better than taking with the bishop, because this knight will reach the excellent e5 square and do so with tempo. And also notice that even though white for the moment has 3 pawns, or 4 pawns for the piece, the g5 pawn is a goner. So black isn't even down anything here. Okay, white castled, knight e5, queen d5. So the knight's on a great square. Now the bishop comes to a good square. And here, according to Fedorowicz's annotations, or at least his suggestion in chess publishing many years ago, rook to c8 would have been better for black, and would have given him a very good game. So Fischer played bishop takes g5, and this was okay too. I mean, black drew without any real difficulty. So it's already a situation where with maybe rook to c8, white might even start to sweat a little bit in the position. So this was a very convincing rehabilitation by Fischer, and he succeeded in drawing, qualified for the candidates, and while he didn't do that great there, the fact that he made it at the age of 15 was a fantastic accomplishment. Okay, well, was this the end of the variation for white? Well, in fact, it wasn't, and white quickly found improvements, and castling with check was the first place to start. Okay, so king to g8, g6, rook g7, rook f7, bishop takes h4, queen takes h6. Now black is up 2 pieces, albeit for 3 pawns, but he's threatened by mate, and still his king's position is quite precarious. Now, around 2000, the year 2000, a player named Dale Kirton, or Kirton, I'm not sure how he pronounces his name, Kirton, claimed in a series of New in Chess articles, also I think they were published online, I think you can find them if you search the internet, where he claimed that white was winning from here, and he presented these monstrously long variations. As it turned out, or at least so it seems to have turned out, Larsen's old maxim that long variation, wrong variation proved to be true in this case as well. So it does seem as if white is not winning by force. At least I'm not aware of white's winning by force, but still it's as I said, very, very dangerous for black. Now there are two main moves for black here, and one quite possibly does lose. So there's queen f6, trying to buy white off, and there's simply rook takes f7, trying to grab everything and hope that white runs out of pieces to give checkmate. Okay, well, let's start with queen f6. Here, white's best is rook to f1, not taking the queen, but keeping this powerful advanced rook on f7 as long as possible. Okay, a takes b5, and now another terrific move by white, e5, clearing e4 for the knight, and again, trying to keep the big pieces as much as possible. So queen takes e5. Now black has three pieces, three extra pieces, and for only 2 pawns. But with this, it's down to 2 pieces for 2 pawns. And now with knight to e4, white's guys are really starting to threaten here. So knight f6 check is kind of a threat. Also, rook takes d7 followed by knight to f6 check could be pretty dangerous as well. So black plays d5 with the idea that if rook takes d7, black can play d takes e4. So knight f6 check, knight f6, rook 1 takes f6, and here black is going to have to cough up the queen. The threat of rook to f8 mate, and also rook takes g7 followed by rook to f7 check. So let me show these. So rook f8 mate. Also rook takes g7, king takes g7, rook f7 check, followed by queen to h7 is going to force a quick mate, whether the king goes back to g8 or up to g6 after the rook to f7 check. So queen to e3 check, rook f2, queen e1, rook f1. Now if queen to e3, king h1, and black is dead, so he's got to cough up the queen. And now he gets to get rid of the other rook too. But the thing is, although materially black is doing pretty well, he's got a rook and 2 minor pieces for a queen and a pawn, nevertheless the white h-pawn and the relatively undeveloped state of black's pieces proves favorable for white. So white is at least clearly better here. For instance, king f6, queen h8, so we pin the bishop on the back rank, so we try to do whatever we can to slow down black's development. King f7, and now here comes the h-pawn, h4. Alright, knight e7, so now the bishop is protected, and rook takes a2 or rook to a4 is forthcoming. But still, it's a bit slow. h5, rook a4, h6, rook f4 check. Alright, doesn't really do too much. King g1, rook g4. Okay, that stops queen to g7 check, followed by h7 and h8, so that's a useful move. But still, queen to e5, and now the threat is h7, once again, which will win a piece. Knight g6, and now queen g7, h7, and the inevitable happens anyway. And in fact, after e5, it's even worse for black, because queen g6, rook takes, h8 queen, and here in a game between Malinin and Wietek from Zaporozhye 2004, black resigned because he's either losing the bishop on c8, or if he plays king to d7, he loses the rook after queen h7 check. So this is, I think, as far as I can tell, this is okay, the whole thing is enforced, but white does seem to have a significant advantage by force after queen to f6 in this position. So rook f7, I think, is the established main move here. Alright, so now g takes f7, king takes f7, and white does have some tries here, but it looks, at the end of the day, like best play is still a perpetual check. I might be wrong, but as far as I can tell from from looking around the databases and messing around with the computer and so on, it looks as if ultimately it's a draw. Though black certainly has ways to go wrong. And white does too. I mean, white has lost games here, but generally it's been in white's favor, the results. So rook f1 check, bishop f6, and now queen h7 check is basically an immediate draw. Knight to d5 will also turn into a draw pretty quickly by perpetual, but e5 is a way of kind of pushing black a bit. So d takes e5, knight e4, And now to show one trap, there was a game between Arkady Najdorf and I think it's Peter Enders, and that game went like this. A takes b5, which looks natural, but it's a losing move. So queen h7, okay, he just repeated. And now here, Najdorf just played knight takes f6. Okay, if knight takes f6, then queen h8 check, and then either the queen falls or, well, the queen's going to fall regardless. So just to show you, okay, so knight takes f6, oops, knight f6, queen h8, and the only way to keep the queen protected is with king e7, but then queen f6 check. If the king goes here, rook to d1, and if the king goes to e8, all the black pieces are in the starting squares, queen f7 is mate. So after knight f6, Enders played queen to b6 check, so getting the queen at least out of the way. But after king h1, knight f6, rook f6, king e8, simply rook f7, and black resigned. There's no answer to queen g8 mate. So this, as I said, was Najdorf against Enders from Hookendorf in 2004. So that shows, again, the danger that's considerable for black if he's even slightly unprepared or underprepared. So a takes b5 loses. But queen to b6 check seems to be okay. So king h1, now a takes b5, and after knight takes f6, not knight takes f6. Actually, does this just transpose? Alright, so shame on me here, perhaps. Yeah, are we just in a transposition? Not quite. Yeah, this isn't quite the same thing. Alright, so knight f6 does lose. Okay, so here's the big difference. Okay, so of course, right. Knight f6, queen f6 check is winning for white. So here, bunch of checks, and if the king goes to c6, then queen takes c8, or rook to d6, or even better still, queen to d6 is mate. If king to c7, then queen d8 check, and queen to d6 is mate. So queen d4 is forced, takes, and again, although black has a rook and two minor pieces for a queen and a pawn, similar story this time as well. White's h-pawn and black's undeveloped pieces mean that white is for choice. And this occurred in a game, an online game on Play Chess, Rafi against Grunke, and white went on to win. So fairly low ratings, but I suspect that this was really a man plus machine event where the game wouldn't have made the databases. So it continued a3, preventing rook takes a2, knight c6, h4, b4, h5. So here comes the pawn as fast as possible. Rook a5, h6, takes, knight e7, king g1, getting out of the way of the check, rook h5, queen g7, and h7, h8 ensued. White won the rook for the pawn and went on to win. Okay, so that means that knight takes f6 is probably a mistake, but here's the difference between that last game and also the Najdorf-Enders game, which is that black can play king e7 here and survive. And it looks as if this is just a draw by perpetual check. So there was a game between Zivkovic and Martinovic from Zenica in 2008, which ended as a draw in just a few moves. So rook to d1, cutting off the black king, but now knight takes f6 is okay, and we just had perpetual check like this, and the players called it a day. Okay, so as far as I know, and I might be wrong, certainly, but as far as I know, this represents more or less best play in this variation. So I think black is still alright. It's scary, has to know an awful lot, have to be able to kind of brave various white attempts, but at the end of the day, it seems like black survives. Alright, you know, caveat emptor if you decide to play this. Alright, so back to queen f3 then. So queen c7, very different approach. Castles queenside, knight b to d7, and now here white has quite an array of approaches. So we'll start with what I think is probably the least interesting variation, and then work our way up. Okay, so queen of g3 I think is pretty dull. Now the idea behind this is to support e5 in some cases, and also to keep an eye on g7. But it looks as if the plan that we just saw in the Gothenburg variation and in some lines last week is completely good. So h6, and now g5. And here, after f takes g5, I think black can equalize in two ways. One is with rook to g8, say knight e5. This is a point that I mentioned before. Putting the knight on e5 is really the big idea behind a lot of these h6, g5 variations. So you neutralize white's kingside pressure, and you get this fantastic outpost for the knight on e5. So on the drawback is that the kingside becomes loose. Obviously, you only do this if you can castle queenside, or if the king is quite safe in the center. And also, white gets the f-file. That's the other asset that white sometimes can utilize in these kinds of lines. All right, so after knight e5, knight f3, h takes g5, and okay, white can take on g5 with the bishop or the knight, but black will have full compensation in either case. So rook to g8 is one way. Another is knight h5. Let's say queen e3, queen c5, ganging up on the g5 pawn, so that's the idea here. Black will recapture this pawn when he's good and ready. So king b1, hg, bishop f2, and here comes the big knight, knight e5. And again, I believe that black is equal here. So this line really doesn't seem very challenging for black as long as he knows what to do. So queen g3 really is not especially popular. At one time it had its flurry, but its day is gone. Okay, a far more interesting approach is Keres' bishop to e2. Now, he didn't invent this move or discover this move. Wasn't the first person to play it. There were two other people who played it before, but I think he was the first big-time player to use it, and the idea that he had behind it was quite different from what the other guys had in mind. So, b5, and it's not really obvious what the bishop is doing on e2. I mean, the rooks are connected, but so what? Well, we're about to see his big idea. So bishop takes f6, knight f6, e5. And I should add that this was played in the first round of the Bled/Zagreb/Belgrade candidates in 1959. And he played this against Fischer. So he prepared this very deeply for Bobby Fischer. And at this point in their careers, Keres was definitely the better player, and in fact came very close to winning this event. But unfortunately for him, he only went 2-2 against Fischer, if I remember correctly. And the upshot was that he came out just short behind Mikhail Tal. And this game certainly didn't help. So Fischer played very, very well. Keres overpressed and eventually lost. So anyway, here's the idea. So e5, bishop to b7, and now the queen does not move, but e takes f6. So this was the really clever idea. So bishop f3, bishop takes f3. See, that's the point. There's the bishop recapturing, and so it hits the rook. Now, at the moment, white has two minor pieces for the queen, but okay, if black moves the rook, f takes e7, and white's compensation is terrific. So the best move is the one chosen by Fischer. So he plays bishop takes f6, giving up the rook, but after d5, the bishop is more or less trapped. So rather than waiting for black to castle, he plays bishop takes d5. Now bishop takes d4, another good move. Rook d4, e takes d5. And here, okay, Keres played knight takes d5, and he's not worse after this. So the position remains in a tense balance, but ultimately it looks as if Fischer is fine. And as I said, he went on to win. Both sides made some inaccuracies, but the trend was basically in Fischer's favor, and he was able to win in the long run. Perhaps a slight improvement is rook to e1 check. Here too, I think black is okay, but I would say maybe the difference is that perhaps black has a little bit more to prove in this variation compared to the other one, though they can transpose as well. Anyway, this is a very fun line. I think that most people have completely forgotten about it too, or have largely forgotten about it. So I suspect that if you prepare this carefully, you might be able to use this as a good weapon even against quite strong players. Okay, so that's bishop to e2, the idea of takes, e5, and this queen sacrifice. All right, now we move on to a third variation, and that's bishop to d3. And this has a lot of very lively lines as well. And I think I also have, perhaps, some theoretical improvements that you can benefit from. Okay, now the most dynamic line here is b5. Before we look at that, I should mention that once again this h6 plan is pretty good. So h6, queen h3 is an important move here though. So queen h3 can be played, and even h4, although h4 I think has not scored especially well over the years. But so those are two alternatives, and perhaps I would recommend queen h3 out of the options. But I'll note that again, if bishop to h4, I think this transposes to a position we looked at last week. So g5 takes, knight e5, so once again this idea, queen e2, knight f to g4. So we're ready to play h takes g5, and we'll do that even if white plays h3. So knight f3, knight takes, pawn takes, h g5 just the same, bishop g3, knight e5. And again, I think we looked at this last time. White plays f4 here. I believe that's the main move in this position. And yeah, it is the main move. But queen f2 is also fairly common, as is h4. So playable position. I think black is equal, but you know, anything can happen here. All right, so that's h6. Just bringing that up, possibly for the last time. But we'll see. I think it's the last time in the variations we're going to look at. Anyway, for now, off to b5. Now, the difference between the bishop to d3 line and some of the other variations we looked at, and certainly the main line we're going to look at with g4, is that in the g4 line, white wants to keep the center stable and attempt to cause some troubles for black on the king side. In the bishop to d3 line, however, white is going to go for play in the center of the board and try to just blast through the middle. Okay, so bishop to b7, and now white has there's another parting of the ways here. So there's the ultra sharp knight to d5, and there's the more positionally minded queen to g3. Again, sidestepping the pin and maybe bringing the e5 option into play. So let me discuss queen to g3 first. Okay, now here, oh no, actually, sorry. Yeah, queen to g3 has some fun stuff. So we're going to look at knight to d5 first. Not that this isn't fun, but I think I have even more fun lines prepared there. Plus, I think queen to g3 is objectively better. So, okay, after knight to d5, e takes d5. We certainly can't let this knight live. So ed, and now, again, white has choices. Basically, e takes d5 or knight f5. If e takes d5, black should play king to f8, head over towards that side of the board, knight f5, and now bishop to d8. And objectively, I think black is fine, but you know, it's the kind of position where it's just whoever plays the best is going to come out on top. So here's one sample variation. So white could try knight takes g7. Now, quick question. Should black take the knight or not? What do you think? Well, the answer is that he probably should not take the knight, because on king takes g7, queen to g3, and the king is really in quite a bit of trouble there. So a much better way to go is h6. And this is quite strong. So takes, here, if white retreats the bishop, then black certainly will take the knight, because there's no bishop to h6 to worry about. So let me just elaborate on that a little bit. So king takes, queen to g3. The point is that white has, among other threats, the following. So bishop to h6 check, king h6, queen g5 mate. So with h6 thrown in there in advance, this threat isn't going to come into play. So h6, bishop f6, knight f6, knight f5. Okay, so white's got two pawns for the piece. Black's king is kind of awkward, but after bishop takes d5, it's down to one pawn, plus he has rook to g8, and then here he has h5. So white has a really difficult time worming his way in and making the attack fly. So ultimately, while I'm sure there can be quite a bit of exploration here, it looks to me as if e takes d5 is not the best move. So knight f5 seems to be better. Okay, well now on king f8, white doesn't bother playing e takes d5. That would just transpose. but instead plays queen to g3. So white's trying to save a tempo to get the same kind of attacking ideas that we saw before. Okay, but now black shows that he gains something out of this too by playing d takes e4. Okay, so now bishop takes e4, bishop e4, rook e4. This position has occurred in tournament practice, but here I think I have a novelty that's good, that improves for black. And it's the move queen to c5. Okay, so we're hitting this knight on f5. It's actually very interesting. So the idea is that although white is hitting e7 in two different ways, black's move tries to really kind of undermine it, whichever way he takes. So if rook takes e7, then queen takes f5. And that's perfectly good for black, who's up a full piece right now. On the other hand, if knight takes e7, well then knight takes e4 is quite good. See, we don't want to play knight takes e4 right away because if bishop takes e7, check. But once the knight's on e7, hey, all bets are off. We can play knight takes e4. So white's best move in this position seems to be bishop h6. So going for blood on g7. But it looks as if black can just absorb this. So he takes the rook, white takes the pawn and then takes a rook too. But remember, black started with a piece up, so now it's a piece for a pawn. And after knight f8, okay, white can get a second pawn. But all of a sudden, white is pretty much run out of attackers. The bishop on f8 covers almost every important defensive square. So it covers d6, it covers g7, and it blocks the back rank. The queen and the rook, black's queen and rook, are lined up against c2. This knight on e4 is well placed. And basically, while the position is still quite sharp and anything can happen, black has made progress. I would say black is a little bit better here. Okay. But again, it's a position that merits study if you're likely to reach either side of the position in your own games. Okay, so back to here. So we just looked at knight to d5, and it looks as if it may be slightly premature, though it's certainly dangerous. So queen to g3, on the other hand, looks like a more promising try. And certainly it leads to some very sharp variations, although a number of them lead to forced draws. Okay, now I have a good novelty here, I think, but let's look at some theory first. So b4 is the typical move, knight to d5, e takes d5, and here, certainly if you like to play fun variations in your games, e5 will certainly strike your fancy. So let's see what happens here. So de, fe, knight h5, and now white has two choices. Okay, choice one is to move the queen someplace, keeping the bishop protected on g5, so either queen to e3, queen g4, or queen to h4. So let's take a look at queen h4. They're all going to come to the same thing. So takes, black's up a full piece here, but the knight's hanging, so g6, and now e6. And here if black tries to keep his extra piece, he's going to get destroyed. I mean, his king in the center is far too exposed. So black has to bail out here with queen f4 check. So takes, white gets the piece back, but black's now up a pawn. Rook f1, knight takes d3 is the only move that makes any sense. Rook d3, f5, and now by playing g4, cracking the position open for his rooks, white maintains sufficient compensation for the pawn. Not necessarily more than that, but sufficient, yes. So black can play this position, but so can white. Anyway, that's queen h4. The alternative is a lot of fun, but it seems to peter out to a draw with best play. So e6, and this line has been known for a long time, and again, very exciting, but I think with best play it's a draw. So here's how the main variation goes. So knight takes g3, of course. Now black's up a queen and a knight, but yeah, notice here too, not e takes d7, but e takes f7. And the point is to keep the black queen shielded away from the king. So king f7, rook e7 check. Okay, now, not king f8, that would of course be a blunder. Knight e6 check followed by rook takes g7, checkmate. So the king runs to g8 right away. Oops. Not sure what happened there. King to, Come on. This is not good. King to g8. Let's see if we're okay now. We're not okay. Wow, what's going on? All kinds of interesting things are happening. So I may just have to move with the mouse instead of the arrow keys. Anyway, h takes g3. Yeah, very important. We have to... Ay. What in the world is going on here? Let's see if I can undo that. Yes, okay. Now I just have to find the position again. And boy, oh boy, what in the world is going on here? The joys of technology. Alright, so e6, knight g3, ef7, king f7. Okay, so we had all this. Rook takes. Okay, pawn takes, right. So not knight to e6 yet. So knight e6, queen e5 is okay. But, yep, still happening with the arrow key. Okay, so hg, queen g3, knight e6, queen e5. And now at first glance we may wonder what exactly is going on here. Okay, I just wanted to save the game here before something really bad happens. Anyway, so what does white do here? How does he handle this position? All right. Oh, that's interesting. Just kind of clever how all these things happened. Anyway, just noticing something different about the board. Okay, anyway, enough of the distraction. Back to this. However this works out. Yep. Okay. Again, messing things up. Sorry about this. All right, one last try, and then I may have to restart this lecture for the third time, which is not going to be fun. I will be an unhappy camper in that event. Okay, so we are here. Alright, what does white do here? Well, he plays rook to f1. And the idea is to bring the rook to f7 and play rook takes g7 mate. And black's best way of defending against this threat is with the move knight f8. I was about to use the arrow key, but then I realized that would lead to something not so fun. So, knight f8. And now white's best move is bishop to f5. So that way on knight takes e6, bishop takes e6 is winning. Okay, so bishop c8. Black must get rid of this knight if he can. But now with rook to e8, everything's okay. So the point is that if black plays bishop takes e6, bishop e6, queen e6, rook f takes f8 mate. So after rook to e8, black has to run out with his king, so that way the rook is protecting the knight. And now white has no choice but to push him back with rook e7, king g8, and there we are with a draw by repetition. So a pretty cool line, and ends as a perpetual check, or repetition, not a perpetual check. So as I said, this has been known for a long time. Those of you who were forced to play your best friend or your girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever in a game, and you don't really feel like playing, feel free to use this, and you'll impress everybody all around you, especially if you engage in a little acting, and you'll get the job done. All right, so that's e5 here. But now we can go further back. Okay, only I can't do it with the arrow key. Let me see if I can do it this way. There we go. Okay, so now, so what was the problem here? Okay, so the problem here is that, after e takes d5, so we had, going back to queen g3. So we were looking at b4, knight to d5, e takes d5, and now not e5, so that's what led to the perpetual checks, but e takes d5. And surprisingly enough, this seems to be pretty good here. So here's how the variations continue. So king to d, now it's not even letting me do that. Okay, here we go. King to d8. Yeah, this time king f8 is maybe pushing it a bit too much. King f8, knight f5, and so on. So knight c6, takes. And here, three moves have been tried, or at least three moves have been tried. Knight to b6, knight to c5, and queen takes c6. Okay, well, let's look at the greedy queen takes c6, especially since this was played by no one less than Alexei Shirov in a blitz game. against David Navarra. So Shirov, in fact, went on to win, but he was in big trouble. So he was clearly worse after bishop takes f6, and then queen takes g7, and then queen takes f7. So here, black is really tied down. He gave up some more material. Actually, right now he's up material. He's up up a piece for 2 pawns, but really the pressure is so severe that he felt compelled to return the material. So takes, queen f6, and now white has a bishop and 2 pawns for the rook. Superior position. Again, black did go on to win this, but I would say that's more to the credit of his feistiness in a blitz game and not the objective merits of this position at all. So I would happily take a position like this against Shirov or anyone else, and so should you. So what this means then is that after d takes c6, queen c6 is really not especially reliable. Okay, knight to c5 I think is a better move, but still, after bishop to h4, threatening queen takes g7, and let's say rook to g8, white is a little bit better. And there's also the possibility of playing bishop takes h7, because on knight h7 we've got this double attack on e7. Okay, so white's got an edge here. Similarly, if instead of knight to c5, black plays knight to b6, again, bishop h4, rook to g8 is probably still best. And again, that same bishop takes h7 idea, if nothing else, is present. White probably has a small edge. Okay, well, now if we say that white has a small edge, we have to improve for black. And I think the place to do it is almost all the way at the beginning of this variation. So after queen to g3, rather than b4, a possibility, and it seems to be an okay one, is the kind of ugly-looking knight to h5. And whenever the queen moves someplace, we're just going to put the knight back on f6. So queen to e3. Okay, if queen f3, that's exactly the same position. Knight h to f6. We just repeated. And even if queen to e3, well, same thing. And it's not really obvious what white has that's any better than just queen to g3, knight h5, and so on. So this might be a reasonable way to continue. Okay, well, we've gone pretty far in here. The show's gone for quite a while too, and also because I'm having this annoyance with the technical issues, I think we'll stop here and leave g4 for next time, and that will definitely be the last time as well. Okay, so this is going to conclude this show. We've got one more to go. Let me remind people to check out my blog. So I'll throw my little plug there. chessmind.powerblogs.com. chessmind.powerblogs.com. As we speak, there are about 4 or 5 different tournaments going on, and I'm trying to at least cover them to some extent. And I have other things going on too on the blog, various puzzles and studies and comments about the chess world. So I hope you'll check it out, and I think you'll enjoy it if you do. So anyway, we're going to stop for now. Next week, g4. Hey, I was able to use the arrow keys. How about that? And that'll conclude our series on the Najdorf. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.